everyone, and welcome to Dragon Talk. I am your host, Greg Tito, today, and this is my co-host, Shelly Mathanoble, right here. She is the Stone of Galore. I don't know if you guys knew this, but she was an aboleth the entire time, and now is personified in this here stone. But no, she is recovering from being at Origins Game Fair. I came in today to work, even though I was also at Origins, but I understand she had a lot more stuff to do. But I'm here, and I get to talk to these two fine people who I've been talking to a lot, as it turns out, the last 6 months, working on the Stream of Many Eyes. So we are joined again by Elisa Teague. Hi, Elisa.
Hello.
And Ivan Van Norman. Hello, sir.
Hello, hello.
So yeah, we embarked on this crazy project to have the off-the-table sessions, what we ended up calling them, for the Stream of Many Eyes. I was inspired a lot, Ivan, by your work with Saga of Sundry and the amazing performances and storytelling and gamification of this crazy tabletop role-playing game stuff that we love. And I was like, what if we could do it fantasy tinted, and we did.
Rose-colored glasses instead of putting a horror lens behind it. Let's see if it works in fantasy land.
Exactly. So yeah, we started working on this. I feel like in craziness around like January, right? End of January, early February was when.
Yeah, well, like you said, we've been talking a lot. We've been talking so much, all of us, constantly leading up into this whole bit. But yeah, no, it was a weird little bit. I was a little honestly terrified when you first approached me. It was like, okay, well, I did it for horror, but will it work for Dungeons and Dragons, which is so different in so many different ways.
Right, and not just to tape, but live as well. Live. So before we, get into the nitty-gritty of how we did all that, I realized, Ivan, there might be some folks who don't know of Sagas of Sundry and your background.
Like what the heck that even is?
Exactly.
The sauce is, exactly. So to speak.
Yeah. So yeah, give it, and also talk a little about your background as far as playing of games and all that stuff too.
Yeah. We International Tabletop Day, not last year, but the year before, we decided to kind of run a session of Dread. And Dread, for people who may not be aware of it, is an indie RPG session co-designed by Ebediah Ravachol, in which they use a Jenga tower in order to motivate story as it's being pushed forward. So you pull a block from the tower when a successful or potentially failure action could occur, and as you pull more blocks from the Jenga tower, the more likely you are to fail. Mm-hmm. And once the tower falls, something miserable happens to your character. So it's a glorious tension and suspense building mechanic that's built on top of a storytelling game. And so I loved it. We played it on tabletop. 2 years even before then, and people loved it. And so we ran it for Tabletop Day, and it was such a hit that the creative director, Marisha Ray, at the time, was like, oh my God, can we do this again? But, can we make it into a whole series? I'm like, well, okay, kind of built for a one-off. I don't know how much we could build into a series, but then we started having a conversation about it and elongating it, and turned into what if we added props, and then what if we built a set around it, and then everyone can be in costume, and what if there was no table? What if it was just the tower sitting there? And we kind of slowly snowballed into this weird, creative, pseudo high school theater, but also a role-playing game, experimental thing. I say high school theater, but I really meant experimental theater. But it ended up not sucking, Greg. Which is really all that I could hope for when I put together a show.
That's the goal of any project that you want, right? Let's just have it not suck.
Let's just have it not suck.
Yeah.
And there was a good response to it. There's enough of a response to it. They made another season out of it, in which we built a freaking 1920s hotel loft, and it was madness. The season after 2 of Dread, and it was pretty fun. They put it. Project Alpha was the people who financed it, so it sits on their platform, but it's also out on VRV.com, which you can get on your next-gen console of choice, as well as I think Amazon.co.uk has it as well too.
Interesting.
So
good, yeah, definitely check it out if you want to see the inspiration for where these off the table sessions came from. Yeah, and it's awesome. And you got Matt Mercer and Satine Phoenix and
and Liam O'Brien and Eric Ishii and
Sander from the Library Bards, and it's so many different doing performances that you haven't seen them done anything similar ever before.
They were all dramatic. They were beautifully dramatic performances that were done with dedication to the character. We all love our interactive, non-scripted storytelling,
right?
But they took this like they were actually, on a stage amidst a live audience, and they performed with their heart and soul. Like this, it's the same kind of performances that you would expect out of non-scripted shows like Spinal Tap and Parks and Rec, but instead of comedy, it's drama.
Yeah,
and it's
suspense and horror and danger around every pull.
Right.
Yes. So
then, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and that just even the word pull, we ended up pulling forward into this when you had your I forgot to bring the deck of cards. Damn it, they're at my desk. But you had the deck of cards that people could pull from in order to find out things that they might need to know in the Waterdeep setting.
So when Elise and I first started talking about it, because she pretty much, when we sat down to put this together, she was going to be writing the puzzles, but you also wrote the entire storyline pretty much with me. We had to talk about ways that we could break the mechanic, because I did the similar thing with Adam Lawson, who directed Sagas of Sundry with me. So Elisa was kind of like my Adam Lawson.
That's right.
Is that weird, Elisa, to call you my Adam Lawson? Is that
it's
odd?
Okay. Adam's cool.
Adam's cool.
You can't see my faces that I make when you're talking, so.
Yeah, that's right. I know, right? She's basically been talking. She's been commenting on what you've been saying this whole time with her faces. Always in good ways. But yeah, no. So then I loved what you had done, but I was like, oh, it should be fantasy, and I loved the puzzles being used in Dungeons and Dragons games so much, and I wanted to pull on your expertise, Elisa, to see how can we bring kind of like a puzzle room aesthetic to a story that would unfold over the course of several sessions of Dungeons & Dragons. So then, yeah, and we talked last week about the ARG and how the puzzles interacted with that as well.
Right, and bringing puzzles into Dungeons & Dragons is an art in itself. It's a little bit different than just regular puzzle solving, but bringing it into a live stream with a very set amount of time was a whole other animal. And that was a cool challenge that we met, and it worked out. I don't think it could have worked out more perfectly as far as timing was concerned, because the whole time I was like, well, they're either going to get these puzzles right away, or maybe they're not going to solve them at all. And we had 4 puzzles. Every single one of them came down to minutes before we had to yell cut, where they had their aha moment and solved it. Thank goodness. Yeah. So, there was no way to tell if they were going to get it or not. It was very nerve-wracking, but exciting.
And that's what you want out of a puzzle, too. You want it to go to that level. You want it to be like, I don't know, I don't get it, I don't know, I don't understand, and then I got it. And then you want to have that moment happen, very, very close to the end of the piece of content in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And unscripted shows just like this is the same. It's kind of doing it live was the same challenge as anything else. It's like we have no idea where they're going to go. We have a time frame in which we need to live inside of. So we just kind of have to set the stage and see what happens. So it can be really I even think about when you put together a classical puzzle room, you have lots of soft openings in which people test it and then they make modifications after that. It's like Elisa tested it a lot on her own, but we didn't get to test it with any kind of live camera equipment or anything. It's just kind of
the live camera equipment. I obviously couldn't test it on set, and a lot of these puzzles were actually built into the set itself. So everything changed, and also we had NPCs that had lines to deliver, and if they weren't delivered exactly correctly, maybe a puzzle hint could be misconstrued. So there were a lot of factors that had to be juggled, but it turned out great.
Yeah, so when you guys were meeting to get together and we were talking about the story and how it would progress, and we wanted to be integrated with the four on the table sessions as well. So there was this progression of information that passed from one session to the other. What was it like trying to come up with ways to get the puzzles out there? And maybe Elisa, I don't think I've ever asked you this question. It's like, why did you choose the puzzles that you chose, and why did you think they make the most sense?
Well, the first puzzle that we did was in the Yawning Portal, and of course, the Yawning Portal is a tavern, and I love one of the classic puzzles that I like to do is that menu puzzle when in my own tabletop games that I run. So I adapted one of my standard puzzles to fit the storyline and everything, the answer that we needed to give. And I actually made that menu board sign that was behind Dernan the whole time. I don't know if anybody...
that was you.
Yeah, I don't know if the people at home watching realized until they really started working on it that is a puzzle. And if for some reason you guys didn't get it and want to go back and watch again and see if you can figure out the puzzle yourself, that's still there for your viewing pleasure. So, but yeah, I knew right away that I wanted to do the menu puzzle for Yawning Portal. There was no question about it. And
I love that you're someone who has I have a standard puzzle. You're like, oh, here's my standard puzzle that I have they're like in my bag. Like you have many that you can just pull out at any moment and bring into something.
After you've written hundreds of puzzles for various things, it's not that I don't reuse them, but there are standard types of puzzles.
Right.
So this one is one that I just thought would be a really good puzzle to start off this team with, because I had no idea how they would do with puzzles in general, and puzzles are tricky. You also want to definitely write puzzles for games role-playing games where you're playing to the characters' wisdom or intelligence when they're solving and not necessarily the player. And so I was really trying to get a grasp for who our characters were going to be, what their stats would be, and what kind of puzzle they would be able to solve. Because I like to put things really in world and in game. So that one was definitely one that I knew for sure. And then the rest kind of came out naturally while working with Ivan on the story. We sat down for breakfast or coffee or a combination. I guess it was both. And we
I think we did a breakfast. Yeah.
Yeah, and we just hashed out all the plot points, and I don't know, they just kind of came out. I'm like, oh, we could do this, and it just worked. So we kind of wrote them at the same time.
Yeah, it was interesting because I had, up until this project, minus, we were chatting a little bit offline before this, minus, her writing a module for the RPG that Jonathan Gilmore and Doug Litovansky did with me called Kids on Bikes. We hadn't really worked on anything together, but she kind of submitted that module. This is the first time her and I actually sat at a table and worked on a project together. And I don't think her and I even knew we were going to be working on a project until Greg was like, oh, and by the way, Elisa's doing this. And, oh, by the way, Elisa,
I didn't know that you were on it until I saw the group email regarding the flight to fly up to Seattle to have our first meeting, and I saw your name, like, oh, Ivan's the other writer. Right. So and I remember years, but we just never worked on anything.
Yeah, that's just usually that is sometimes how it goes. And that first meeting that we had up in the Seattle offices, when we basically hashed out what the overarching piece, and because that first real brainstorming session was there was actually a lot of things that ended up changing from that session, but a lot of the stuff ended up staying the same. We determined what the sets were going to be, what the main sets were going to be. And then we determined how we were going to kind of get to those three sets. Because, you had parameters too, Greg, of we're going to build, Waterdeep, and we're going to build the Yawning Portal. Mm-hmm. And so with knowing that we had those in place, we kind of fit the storyline to make that work, plus on top of the games that the players are going to run. So originally, the session was supposed to be, we were actually going to have a player from each one of the tables for on the table sessions. We were going to have a representative from each one of those tables players be in the off the table session.
Yeah, we latched on
that
that
was,
idea early because we liked that kind of representative of like, oh, there's that's the reason why they're together. I think at one point you even called it a super group because it was like the group, like the people made out of other members of the group, and then that
it was totally a Justice League slash Avengers version of it, where they were all kind of coming together, sending their representative in order to bring it together.
Right, which would have been totally cool, but the logistics of that, it was very difficult to do. It'd be like, oh, how are they going to come from one group to the other, and have it be the seamless transitions that we wanted it to be.
Yes, and ended up being a lot more challenging to pull it off in a way that made it make sense versus just the idea itself. So when Elisa and I sat back and kind of readjusted it based on those notes, we kind of came to where we were now, which was a way to kind of like bring Satine into that as like her own rep, but everyone was kind of unique and on their own as far as the storyline goes. But they were being affected by the chaos around them between like, Satine sending her sirens in, and then, her going to the group, and then, dice camera action, kind of like setting it all up the day before. And then Dark and Dicey, which I still will always remember that game with Dark and Dicey when they spent the entire day chasing that stone. Spoilers, by the way. Spoilers ahead.
No worries, all good.
They spent the entire day chasing that stone, and at one point, one of the players asks them, "Are we in trouble because of you?" And the stone's like, well, yep. He just like throws it over his shoulder and barely recover it. But I loved the drama around that. It was so good.
I did too. I loved it too. And I completely actually forgotten that the session of brainstorming up here in the offices where we got all the writers from Dungeons and Dragons, the concept artists, and kind of talk through a little bit about what the Dragon Heist storyline was all about, so that you guys had access to the story guide, which kind of gives the overviews of the themes and some major characters that will be in it. But you don't really get a full sense of it until you have Chris Perkins be able to be like, hey, this is what this story is going to be about. And then we spent a good 2 or 3 hours in that room, really hashing out the skeleton of what the plot was going to be.
And then we just needed to fill it out.
Yeah.
And then after like Elisa and I sat down with it more, all I had to really do was just fill it out for the players. And then it was so pivotal, and Elisa brought this up several times, but it's so pivotal that like certain information be protected to the players so that it doesn't basically ruin the puzzles. And that was just between a lot of contractors, so to speak. It was kind of hard to make sure that they all knew the vitality of that information.
But even just on set that day, it was so hard, because I had to before I say something, like, oh, we need to set the. And I'd like,
is there no one here? Is there no one here?
Okay, none of them are here. This is what we need to do, because we didn't want to spoil anything for them. A lot of people may think that this was semi-scripted, but it really wasn't. Even with Satine, the funniest thing, I love Satine so much. She DM'd, the first game, the Sirens game, which then led into her playing the off the table game as a character, and she had clues that she was delivering for puzzles in her game. So we dropped clues throughout all of the on the table games, and each of these games connected to the other. So everybody needed to be paying really close attention so that they could know how to solve the puzzles later. And the more they paid attention, the better off they would do with the puzzles. And Satine was dropping clues in her game that she was DMing, and then forgot the clue when she was live on camera. Like, wait, what is it that I said? And she took a moment, and she really didn't remember, which was perfect, because I was scared that she would have player knowledge or whatever, but she didn't, and it was perfect.
Right.
So
was that the time where she said the name of the noble and she completely butchered it?
Yeah. She blended Bellabronte and Umkathra together into one super name, but it was perfect.
Yeah, that whole leading those crew is just wild, because it is, especially on that big open set, I kind of felt like Mr. Rogers guiding people through the neighborhood, and then stuff is just happening everywhere. It was so different, Greg. This live is so different. It's so hard, but it's so satisfying.
It ended up being, I think that first session we were a little bit like, oh gosh, how is this going to work, right? Because it was this cramped space that was harder to put people where you needed them to be, kind of in a way, right? Because it was live.
And as always, this is the classic DM fault. It's like you have to literally shade in every single corner, because I readily assumed they were going to be spending a lot of time on this puzzle because it was right in front of them and Bonnie was going to be delivering it. But they were so wrapped up in talking with everybody in the tavern that I literally should have seen that coming. And we worked with it beautifully, and it was fine. Everyone did have enough information in order to make it okay. But it was one of those things where, like, we mic'd the wrong people. Like, we didn't have enough mics to cover everybody inside of that tavern, and it just was one of those, okay, well, here we go. That's why we have a boom. So let's do this.
Let's make it work. And plus, we made the characters in that tavern be too exciting and to pass up.
They were
a conversation
so excited.
with.
How could you
can't
not
really
go to
not
Chris
talk
Lindsay?
to Elminster or Mert. I mean, they were sitting in there. There was no way they weren't going to go over and talk to them. That's for sure. But just like in any normal home game, you have to plan as a DM that your players may, go off, your chosen path and go and explore a different area or talk to different people. And they did, but we brought it back around.
Yeah.
Or Ivan brought it back around.
Ivan brought it back
I
around.
was waving frantically behind the camera like,
no, do this.
One of my favorite memories of the day is always going to be Elisa with the whiteboard with notes. It's just like, it was Elisa's writing being like, I think one of them was, and sometimes they would be vague enough that I wouldn't get it at the half a second that I'd be able to look at it before I'd have to pull my head away. But it would usually be like, bring Bonnie, or or get the menu.
The problem was that I didn't want to give any, if the players looked at me for any reason, I didn't want to give them clues. So I was trying to write my clues in code to you. We should have had those football hand signal or baseball, I don't know, one of those hand signals.
Then we would have forgotten all of those too, and then been really up Schitt's Creek.
I didn't even think about that, Elisa, how that's so true. Like, if you had written something that would have been a lot more direct.
Here's the clue. You don't look at this. You look at this. Yeah.
So, yeah, it was fun. Okay, that day was stressful but super fun.
So yeah, Ivan, talk a little bit about how different it is dungeon mastering for something like that, while also, being in costume and being on camera and knowing that, so much of this is kind of riding on the, your ability to make this feel real for the audience.
I don't know. It's doing them I think the biggest thing for me that just made it feel a lot more pressure is just the fact that it's live. Like, there just really isn't. One of the glories that we had around sagas to be able to do is that if a movement wasn't quite correct, or if a piece of information was lost, or even if sound was bad, we could basically say, okay, hold, then the sound guy would come in, check the player's mic, go and test, and then we'd go right back into it. And that just kind of that protects the quality of the stream a lot more. It's like an insurance policy. I felt it. It's like we had the capabilities of making sure that sound was good, picture was good, that all the coverage that we were getting is accurate. And the challenges that we had with this one that really made it feel different is that we can only have so many cameras on the set. So we only had so much coverage that we could cover between myself and the 4 players and whatever they're doing. Mm-hmm. So it was very much a dual brain where you're trying to think like a director a little bit. Like, you're trying to think like a film director of how is this looking and where am I going with this? But at the same time, still DM. Be a dungeon master, guide the story, provide the information you give them the little taps they need in order to go into different directions, and just ensure that everything's being explored. And like I said earlier, it was some things that you think are going to be totally fine aren't, and sometimes the things that you were totally worried about go along completely fine. And that's just the glory of unscripted storytelling, which, I told I've been cramming this acronym into people just because I like how it represents people so much, but it's theatrical drama reality role-playing games. So It's different than how LARPing works, where LARPing is very much everyone is the PC, like everyone is a player character in their own story, and they're trying to give other people moments of glory. Like I've been told that in LARPs, one of the best things about LARPs is that everyone lifts everybody else up. But this one is about a cast of characters that are going through a storyline. And if you have people like Elminster and Mert on the side, well, it's not their story. They're a part of the story, but it is not their story. In a LARP, they would be their own story as well.
They'd have their own story as well, right. Yeah,
but
that's interesting.
But in this one, they are supporting the story. And so there's still a lot of a dramatic performance, like I guess, honestly, stage is probably the most accurate way to describe this, whether you're filming stage or doing it live. And I think the to come back and make it very truncated and a very long answer for your very short question is that I think the reason this one felt so different is because this one truly felt more like theater than anything else I've ever done. Live theater.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Elisa?
Absolutely. Live theater with kind of a choose your own adventure consequences between each thing. It definitely had that feel. And aside from just it being live theater, we had to go with the flow on whatever was going to happen. I remember right during the Dark and Dicey game, we knew that whatever happened in their game was going to have a major consequence for the next off the table game. And I remember
for the Rivals of Waterdeep game when they had their puzzle with the stones.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
And so when they had the stones out there, I was in the green room and watching them either solve or not solve that puzzle. And I was like, oh, I don't think they're going to solve it. And it was about 5 minutes too. And I'm like, they're not going to solve it. They're not going to solve it. So I ran and I found Ivan, and I was like, because he was prepping for the next live game, and so he wasn't able to be like watching it live. And so I ran and I found him, like, they're not going to solve it. We need to rewrite this part of the story on the fly. Like they're not going to get these clues. And he's like, okay, we can do that. And he was on it and super professional. And he's like, okay, we've got this. And so I run back, and there are 2 minutes left in the game, and I'm watching, and they solve it. And so I ran back to Ivan. I'm like, they solved it. It's okay.
I actually remember you running back, but I also remember getting a text on my phone, and it was all caps, and it was from you, and it just said, they solved it! Exclamation point. Okay, yes.
Nice.
And then, of course, because we don't have our phones on it, you came too, just to make sure that I double, triple knew that they solved it. But I do remember seeing that text from you.
Yeah, it was so seamless that day, and everything was running like clockwork. And so I didn't want you to go live because I obviously can't talk to you once you go live, and except for my crazy hand waving. And so, but yeah, it's just one of those things where, it was just like live theater, but you never know what's going to happen. We don't even know what's going to happen.
But you literally are changing the script right before you go on stage. So
right.
Dungeon Master does it a little bit, but they have a different format where they have their improvisers all playing NPCs, and then they have their cast as like people from the audience that they interact with. But it is live stage. And it is not recorded or meant for an audience. So I feel like Dungeon Master is actually the one who gets to do it. Plus, they also have like a whole week of rehearsals with all of their characters before we get into it. Yeah, so they like a traditional stage troupe, they go through all the different things that players could hit while they hit the different story points. I think I talked to our NPC guardsmen who are going to do the third off the table session, Mr. Whitefire and his team of guards. I talked to them that morning about what was going to go down, but they were awesome.
I was just going to say,
pros, man.
The interactions with them in the final session were superb.
Killed it. I was so proud of that guard, just winging it with Satine while Satine. And one of the thing to celebrate for her as well too is she realized at some point that her interaction with that guardsman needed to kind of go into the background. So they seamlessly, without even prompting from me, went to miming and lip syncing while the other players were frantically looking through the stuff. And I thought that was. It was so good of them to do that.
Yeah.
So.
And it was only after like the third session that people started to feel like, oh yeah, this is how it would work in a live,
That's
kind
how
of
we do with Dread, man. First episode, like Dread, when we first did that first one, like I was so terrified that we were going to bore the hell out of our audience because nothing happened, Greg, for that first episode. They didn't even pull a block from the tower until like an hour into the first session.
Yeah, and you're like, this is not working, but it's compelling somehow because it's like that threat of the gaming thing happening is all you need almost.
Yeah, it ended up working out totally fine. And same boat with this one. I would do it again in a heartbeat, and I know that we would know how to bring up the quality of it so much because we knew what we needed to do in order to make it more friendly for camera.
Yeah.
Because we had a good idea anyway. Even with 2 shows under my belt, you learn something new every show.
Yeah. Well, what I like about what you guys are saying too is that it's other than the production value and the other people involved in it and all the props and the costumes and things like that, it's not that dissimilar from how people run a D&D session, right? Like you're always, I mean, just the way you're saying, like it doesn't end up being, going exactly the way you planned it because your players are always going to do something different and you like something that you prepared, 6 different scenarios in your head. All right, these are the 6 things they're going to do. They're going to find a 7th, and then once you prepare for that, they're going to find an 8th, right? So there's all of these things that sound true to everybody who's ever run a game of D&D to what we did.
Absolutely.
And the nice thing, sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I say absolutely. Like even in your example of what Satine was doing with the guard, it was making me think while you were talking just about how regular play goes. In D&D, like, yes, everybody sort of takes their turn, and we didn't do like traditional combat or anything like that, but because we didn't want to do that live. But
next time.
Even in a good game, even while you're in combat or anything where people are saying what they are doing, everybody always says, while so-and-so is doing that, I'm doing this. And so I was thinking when you were talking about what Satine was doing with the guard, that's exactly how that played out on screen. While they were looking for the stones, she was distracting the guard, and while they they were digging through everything. They had other guards coming through, and maybe there was another chest that needed to be seen, and the camera was panning in on that, but the players didn't know. And there was a lot going on that would have normally been going on in a regular just at the table session. You just got to see it.
Yep.
Yeah, and that was the whole idea, was to make it more of like a heightened version of D&D where you don't get to see any of that stuff, but here you could actually we could physically represent it.
And it's always better when players don't know that the cameras are there, like they're aware of it. But I've also found that in a show format like this, when it's live, it's the exact opposite. You have to be extremely aware of where cameras are because we only had what we had to work with in order to get the coverage on it. I actually had to make all the players extremely aware of where cameras were and make pauses and kind of allow for cameras to get in place to do that. Which normally, if I was going for dramatic storytelling, be like the worst thing on the planet. But since this is fun and it's uplifting and it's D&D, it's not so much an issue, And that's I think the first thing we found out too, real quickly in that first session, Greg, is that this show is way more fun when we all just let go and let the silly come out a little bit.
Yeah.
Like once we were a little aware of what we were doing and how we were doing it, people had more fun. Then it wasn't. It didn't have that. It had that new kind of fresh, fun energy to it, and I think that helped a ton.
Yeah, because everybody was like, a little bit unclear and unsure, and wanted to make sure it was the best that they could do. So nobody, and so there's going to be that little bit of tension when we started. And I do think that first session was more like a, I don't want to say a rough draft, but it was like the first thing out the gate, which is never going to be your best foot forward for something creative.
It's just I didn't even know. Like Greg, none of us knew. Like everyone who was attached to that show had no idea what we were getting ourselves into until we were actually there and doing it. And then once we found it, it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was there. And it didn't take, which is always great.
Right. It only took 1 hour-long session for it to be like, oh, okay, now we got this. And it all
now we're here.
Clicks together. I mean, like you said, everything, I think, I loved all the conversations that happened in the awning portal. And I think only thing in hindsight would be to what you're saying is like, let's mic everybody and like get everybody lit enough so that they really could just go and then we'd have clues for each one of them and everything, so they would all be more integrated. That would be the only thing I think I would change.
I agree, and it's all the good news is that these production notes are the easiest to address in any kind of future projects. So it's the big problems like, wow, that wasn't honest or sincere or fun at all. Those are the notes you have to worry about and being like, okay, well, maybe this wasn't a good idea. But I don't think anyone, at least as far as what we're concerned, I don't think anybody got that. I think everyone had a really good time seeing D&D kind of come to life, and then letting the mechanics get out of the way with the random number deck. So kind of just help pacing a little bit. So
do you want to talk a little bit about the number deck and how that worked?
So when Greg, when you first approached me about this, the first honest thing I had to ask myself is, how do you make this D&D without getting involved in all the things that usually are challenging when you're on the table, which is pacing, because the big difference between a table session like this and an off the table session is pacing. It really is. And because you don't have a huge opportunity to stop and sit and do math and reference numbers, which is something very common at a table game, even if it's just looking down at your sheet and then, doing a few seconds and then rolling into it.
Yeah.
But you don't even have that luxury in something like this. So, but you still need to make it feel like there's consequences and that there are things that are happening, that there are things like what Elisa built into it with our guard tower where, you make choices and there are consequences. But even just on a standard check-to-check basis, basically floated this idea of like, okay, well, how can we roll a dice without rolling a dice? And that's where we came up with the tarot cards. And the tarot cards are essentially really easy to show camera because they are big letters on cards. And it's still, as far as a number generator goes, is still about as valid as rolling a dice. Although it seemed like they were all rolling pretty low.
They did not.
As far as drawing from the deck.
They did not pick those cards very well.
Yeah.
They did not do it very well.
They also didn't spend their boons very well either. They had a lot of bonuses that they were pulling, and they weren't using them. I don't know if they forgot about it and all the tension, but they had opportunities, but they still got by.
Yeah.
They still got by, and it's okay because failure moves forward, as with anything. So it is still a little bit different on that. So it is still, when you do these off the tables, there is very much like it's not as much of a gray scale of success and failure as you would put on like on the table, because I can't generate like a random monster encounter on an off the table session, or I can't have them decide to solve a problem with a fireball in an off the table session. Like there is a lot more like narrative free form that you can get on the table, but there is a lot that you can do on the table, especially if you prepare the audience in the meantime to be like, okay, well, just so you know, anything can happen. And we stepped away from combat in this for lots of different reasons. One, because we didn't want it was a safety issue and a liability issue, and two, there is just a general sense of like, how's this going to fit in like the water deep, intrigue and kind of stealth and diplomacy kind of session.
Yeah.
But I do think it is possible. It is just going to involve even more cogs.
It's pretty hard to do though live, because especially if you don't want to script anything, because if you have player characters that get involved with combat and you don't have any choreography, it can become a mess. So
and how we handled combat in Dread and Madness is I just generated these NPCs in the theater of the imagination and they resolved them with pulls, So narratively we described combat, but we never played it out,
Right.
Like if they wanted to get up and swing the bat and like, pantomime it as a thing and go into it, then that was fine. But, the Sagas of Sundry narrative space allowed for theater of the imagination, and because we had so many NPCs in our world, we kind of, like in my mind, if I was going to generate an NPC out of nowhere, I should probably have him on standby, and we don't necessarily want to do that.
Well, and so much of D&D combat is fantasy oriented as well. I mean, there's the swords and the bows and the more mundane things that we might have been able to dramatize if you came to the Sunday sessions and saw the stunt performers from Creative Combat, as well as the folks from the Gentlemen Adventurers. It's possible, but it's with rehearsal and timing and all that stuff.
It's with rehearsal.
Yeah, but
yes.
It's also really difficult to get across the fireballs and the things that magic missiles and the things
that's when you have to land on the theater of the imagination a ton. You got to lean on that for that.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
we very early on were like, we're not going to do any combat in any of these sessions, and we tried to make sure the actors and players were like, no, guys, even if it feels like it might be a combat thing, just don't and go with it. And that led to some hilarious, I think, with Kate Welch as Rosie Beestinger. I think she had the instinct. She wanted to fight. And she's like, oh, no. She wanted to fight, but she's like, all right, no, here.
Punching one of those city guards.
Yeah. Take my staff instead, and then, get let off with which I think, made...
I remember her saying, like, can I fight back? And I was like, nope, you can't. No, you cannot.
Not in this session.
And that's okay, because it's still... it's still so interesting. It's so Wild West, Greg. I have so many ideas, and I have so many ways to kind of like address a lot of the things we learned in Stream of Many Eyes. But it's something you just learn and adapt in everything you do. Just
like I always, games. Going back to the puzzles, I think one of the things that I wanted to get realized, and I think we did do it pretty well in the third session, but was to have it feel a little bit more claustrophobic and have the last session be in a puzzle room itself. So have almost, you, Ivan, be a disembodied voice as the dungeon master to be able to speak to them and actually have them feel entrapped. And at least I know you have lots of experience with puzzle rooms. So I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Putting them, all these actors together, and we'll have the cameras in the right way so it would feel, get some of that kind of suspense and the real world puzzle solving, plus with the feeling of like, the walls closing in too.
Right. Originally, that last puzzle was written in that way, but logistically, we weren't able to get it done with the sets that we had. But that is still something that I'd like to see in a future show.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that another time.
Yeah. What would you do differently? What would you think you would do if you had your druthers for something like that?
Well, I definitely would want to do a fourth wall removed escape room style room, where they felt more. I mean, I know that they had in their right minds, they had the time pressure because they knew we had an hour and they had to solve the puzzle, but something that put a little bit more pressure on them. I also, looking at everything, I would want to go over with the players just what abilities they have, and for them to not forget about the fact that they are playing Dungeons and Dragons. One comment that I made to Ivan at the end of the day was the realization that I had that none of them asked to like roll for perception, right? At any point in time, if they would have said, hey, what do I see? Because they could actually see, they didn't think about it. But if they would have asked the DM, what do I see? He could have pointed out something maybe that they weren't actually seeing with their own eyes, like a specific article in the newspaper that we made, the Waterdeep Wazoo, or something like that, where they could have gotten a little bit more information if they had remembered live on camera that they are playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? And so I think that for the next time, I want to even insert more D&D into it. And now after running through it all worked out really well, but I have so many ideas for how to do that.
Nice.
Yeah, and on the flip side, I wanted to incorporate a lot more things that represent things. So in Sagas, we did a lot of like physical challenges or skill challenges that would represent situations in the theater of the mind. And I think there's a great way to incorporate that into this as well too, where it's not necessarily die-based or it's skill-based, but it's the actual players physically doing something. And to be a certain degree, that does remove a little bit of the I'm playing a fantasy fantasy character in a fantasy world. But then I also really like this idea of challenging the physical players themselves in order to pull something out to kind of like put that. It's more immersion in my mind.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And I think one of my favorite moments was when they were pulling through and trying to get the Stone of Kalor out of the fish tank when they finally found it for that reason, right? Was they were doing something that was physically challenging to do, and then having Mark Hume just run off with it was one of my favorite moments.
It was perfect.
And they played it all great. And I think to Elisa's point, like puzzles that lean more into D&D or stuff that allows to lean into D&D where you can make checks, and like checks directly give you either hints or provide blockades with failures, but still they're just blockades. You can go around them. I think is something that would be extremely fun, because D&D is such a, here are my tools. How do I solve the problem with my tools?
Yeah.
And I think, Elisa, to your point, like if we can use those tools a little more rather than just kind of it being a black and white success or failure kind of option, and finding ways to integrate those tools into the setting would be extremely exciting. It's and then I guess it all just comes down to logistics as well, too. In my mind, I would definitely, if we're going to be putting NPCs into a game for the next time around again, I'm going to want to like basically give every NPC like a 2-page story that they have to work off of. So if they have to talk, then they have a good amount of time to talk about what they have to need, knowing they need to cut it off at any one particular point.
Or even better, let them generate their 2-page story.
Well, of course.
Yeah, right?
Let them hold into it. And a lot of them had like a paragraph or 2 paragraphs, which was fine for like the initial 5 seconds that they were going into it. But if they wanted to dive any deeper, they needed a more situational awareness of what was going on in the setting in order to provide information or not, because they were so worried that they were going to say something wrong. They were constantly looking at me, and I would like to give them all the confidence to be able to speak with authority, knowing that they're not going to mess something up.
They should have been looking at Elisa the whole time with the whiteboard, being like, "Yes, you're doing good. No, go back. Take back what you just said, and don't let them know that information."
I'm of the mind of like giving the NPCs that have valuable information, having them have a backstory is very important, and letting them go with it is great. And people like Gil and the others that were on set were doing a great job with it.
Yeah.
But any other just stand-in NPCs that didn't really have a lot of information to give, I'm still of the mindset of giving them the traditional video game RPG one line, like the chickens look healthy today, whatever. And then anytime they would come up to them, they'd give the same line. They're like, okay, this person has no information, right? And move on. And the reason why is because we had an hour to work with on these off the table games, so we didn't want to waste too much time.
Right, because you could have gone down the rabbit hole pretty easily.
Oh yeah, that hour went by so fast in each. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, I'm like, oh my god, it's time. They were already, holding up the 20 minutes left, then 10 minutes left whiteboards right next to me. I'm like, what? How's that possible? So.
Yeah, and we had to control that flow of information directly, and I should say I didn't want to give NPCs more information so that they would run the clock out. I just didn't want them to look at me like scared does most of the time when they were pulling off good information. Like our butcher, I think, really did the best beat, where he had a couple of really short, direct lines. The ogre, and he every single time they tried to get information out of him, he basically gave them a wall that they sat in front of. But it wasn't the same line over and over again. He was just like, are you going to buy meat? Then get out. Kind of a
right. Marag, the half-orc butcher.
Marag.
Yeah, he did a great job with that. He's such a good DM in general, so he knows how to juggle stuff like that.
That was
Dallas Bloom. Yeah,
Dallas Bloom. Yeah.
Dallas Bloom, thank you. Yeah, I was trying to look up his name as I was talking to you guys. I'm like, I remember his name. I don't want to get it wrong.
He's fantastic. He's a friend of several of the women in Girl Scouts Glory. So when we started talking to him, he immediately had this idea. He's like, I want to play a half-orc. We're like, great. We don't have a lot of half-orcs. That'd be awesome. He's like, I think I want to be a butcher. And then I told that to Aaron Baroud, our designer. And he's like, I can get some meat. I can get some fake meat. And we're like, okay, sure, get some fake meat. And then those conversations just led to that character growing and growing and growing to the fact where Dallas brought in little plastic cockroaches to put on the meat. That, like, I think that little detail alone sold the fantasy of him being this shop owner. So it was really kind of great. And I loved him. And I loved Gil's whole display as the blacksmith. Really sold that as being something real too. It was good stuff.
Yeah, they're all great. They all are so passionate, and so they all just wanted to bring a really good product to the boar. You know, so
yeah. So final question, Ivan. I don't think we actually got to talk about this because the second session, the players found the door. At least they wanted to go towards the door that was the solve, and I don't think any of us were like, oh, what if they just go to the door, the first door, and it's the one they need? What do we do then? So did you expertly just be like, did you stretch? Was that you being like, wait a second? How did you do that?
Do I have to answer that question?
You deflected very well. I was standing in the shadows, right, like where the city guard was hiding, and I saw them go in the door. I'm like, oh my god, they're going to go through the door. They're going to go through the door, and I think you course corrected really well, Ivan. You were like, oh, well, are you sure? Because the city guard is right there, and if you break into somebody's house and it's not the right one, and then it made them step back and say, okay, maybe we should think about this before we just go barging into some poor person's house, right?
But it's going to be the right house.
Because that was the right one, the green door, damn it. Yeah. And then I think the guards walked out right as you said that, too. And I think that sold it kind of immediately, being like, oh, okay, there's a danger element here that we didn't know about.
Oh, yeah, I didn't mean to like, I hope I didn't show. I know for the people who knew what the right answer was, I was showing my hand very obviously. But I really didn't want to accidentally tip off the players as well, and make it look like I was deflecting them hard, you know? So, yeah, but I'm happy the way that turned out.
Yeah, so. You pulled it off well.
It's just like a table game. It's like you're the DM and somebody wants to touch this like weird pillar in the middle of the table, and you want the answer is to touch it, right? But the DM's like, so you really want to touch that? And then they think, well, maybe not, and then they think about it for a little while, and that's what a DM is supposed to do.
It's the like Ren and Stimpy. It's like maybe something bad. Maybe something good. I guess we'll never know.
That was pretty much the entire session.
Yeah, it's truth. They were good though, and I think that logic puzzle, like having, I definitely imagine worlds down in the future where we have puzzles that also challenge their endurance and their will as well too. It's like how do we get them to, in my mind, I mean, I guess it's just the horror guy in me. It's like as much physical and emotional pain I can put them in, the better, you know?
Right. Like B Dave, I thought did wonderfully as the monk, but there wasn't a lot of very monk-centric content for him to kind of, do. So how interesting would that have been?
I would have loved to have given him something simple, like, I mean, in Sagas of Sundry, we actually had, if any of the characters wanted to break down a door inside of the dilapidated house, I had those those karate like rebreakable boards that don't have a lot of resistance if it's just one of them, but they stack them up in order to like make it more difficult.
Yeah,
I would have loved to have had like something like that where I actually had something for him to physically break. It wasn't actually going to hurt him or prevent any physical harm, but which has been really great to see him like do a couple of monkish moves and had something as a result of that.
Right.
And it's still just all stuff to think about for later. Like you gotta design these shows within parameters, and you gotta always think about what's best right now for the show. But good news is you get to dream about more stuff later.
Right. So. And so we have to figure out how to incorporate the D&D improv musical that we're doing next year.
I'm totally game.
Yeah, we can do it.
Nice. We'll get the pianist just doing some,
improv pianist.
Just keeping
it
going.
People on Twitter right now. D&D improv musical. It's happening.
Musical, I've said a couple of times. I don't know if improv musical is going to work or not, but
you got to have a good pianist, man. Someone's just like, all right, James, give me a beat.
Yeah, and he's like, here we go. It'll be like, from Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yep.
Just having a go with rhyming couplets. I think it might work. Well, thank you guys for all of your hard work in putting together the Off the Table sessions. I think it really played off really well, and it got people excited and talking about, what's the possibilities for D&D in the future. So, have you guys gotten any feedback from anybody who's watched it that it seems worthwhile to share?
I've gotten nothing but incredibly positive feedback. Everybody seemed to really love it, and people are rewatching it over and over again, looking for new things, which is really cool to hear. And I think everybody's really jazzed about the new products coming out, and that's exactly what it was supposed to do.
Nice.
Yeah, same boat. Twitter has only been kind as far as what's been going on with the sessions. And, I'm my own worst critic, so I know what I would always like. But at the same time, I was really super happy for what it meant for the format as far as the show goes, and then just kind of seeing people get stupid excited about Waterdeep again. Like my buddy Robert Watts, who was the director, the stage manager for the day.
Yeah.
Like we used to play campaigns way back in the day. We were in like a 2.5-year-long campaign together, but he hasn't played in a couple of years. He came after me after the show was done. It's like, man, I really want to do a Waterdeep session.
Nice.
It's like, that's perfect. That's exactly what this is. That's so good.
Yeah. And Rob, shout out to Robert for all of the hard work he put into making this. He landed in the AD role pretty hardcore, and I don't think it would have been the same show if he wasn't there. Being the liaison between you guys.
Him and Dirk were amazing. It was a shame we missed Adam Lawson on the show down the road, but Dirk and Robert just killed it. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, Adam would have been fantastic as well. But next time for all three will be this
next time.
Great little triumvirate of talking heads telling us, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Greg. I really appreciate it. We definitely it definitely was an experience, and it was an awesome one. So Thank you for getting us involved.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Elisa. Now I have several puzzles in my back pocket I can pull out at any moment. Be like, here we go. No one's going to understand them, but you can do it. So thank you.
Don't understand them. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry. You can always give me a ring and say, hey, what do you suggest for this? I'm here.
That's what I'm going to need. I don't have that skill of hinting that you do. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We will end this now, but then we'll be talking more in the future for all the musicals we're going to be producing.
Sweet.
Sure thing.
Thanks, you
Thank
guys.
you so much.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.
Excellent. They are amazing people. They do good stuff. I am so excited with them. I can't wait for what we're going to do in the future. It's going to be super fun. I am going to take a short break right now and then record some fun lore you should know segments with Mr. Chris Perkins. We have a fun list of topics to go over. Mr. Cernet is out of the office right now, so it'll just be me and Chris. We'll get that all ready for you guys and be back in about 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you for watching on the Twitch. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. Okay, bye.